Rubio.
Thank you both for being here. My question is going to be about deterrence, but I want to lay the framework that I think is already embedded in your testimony. One of the things I think we're struggling with two things as we debate it broadly and even here on the committee and beyond. And the first is that I don't think we fully accept yet that we're back to sort of a historically normal era of great power competition. For 25, 27 years, we've been in a unipolar world, and we had difficulties with certain countries. Now we have a near-peer competitor in China for the first time in a quarter century, and we have, at least in the military realm, a near-peer competitor in certain spheres, geopolitically as well, in Russia. And in that realm, the second thing I think we struggle with is the notion that informational warfare is not warfare. It is warfare by different means. It has always been a part of warfare. The difference now is that propaganda and efforts to divide, demoralize, confuse the enemy, you can do it electronically now. And so what's happening now is not a part of an effort to help Republicans, Democrats, independents, vegetarians, whatever party you want to take. It is an effort to help divide us against each other and weaken us internally and from within. That's a tactic. And in terms of our policies, you see some of the simplistic way people approach us. There's one group that almost argues we shouldn't be talking at all to them, right? And which I think is, despite my deep antagonism towards Vladimir Putin, what he represents and the things he's done, I don't want to see a shooting war because it would be catastrophic for the world. And so at a minimum, that should keep you engaging and talking and working where possible within the context of understanding you are in a competition more of his making than ours, but nonetheless one that he believes in, a zero-sum one in which he can only get stronger if we get weaker. And the flip side of it is if we just talked, if we just were nicer to each other, we would be able to get along better, which is also false because at the end, it goes back to what I just said. He views this as a zero-sum competition, and the only way he can be stronger and restore Russia to greatness, at least his vision of it, is by us to be weaker. And so in that competition, everything we're debating here is about the tactics they're using, right? They can't compete with us economically. They can't necessarily compete with us militarily in terms of projecting power all over the world. But what they do very intelligently is a low investment in military intervention in exchange for influence in the Middle East. So he's now becoming a power broker in Syria, in Libya, in different parts of the world because he's got enough airplanes and enough troops on the ground to make a difference there. He's even trying to finagle his way somehow into the North Korea talks. He wants to be a player in that. You see in Europe, there was an article yesterday about a growing number of European countries after new elections, far left and right parties have come to power that are potentially moving those countries closer to. I think he went to the wedding, is it the Austrian prime minister, is that right, or president? Yeah, and foreign minister. And then, of course, the asymmetrical means that we're discussing, which are part of it. To them, it's a very low-cost way of getting into our, getting in our heads and in our society and dividing us against each other. So in the context of all of that, if we can finally accept the fact that we are in a sort of, we are really in a great power competition with China, and in some ways, a similar competition with Russia. They're not as big as China. They don't pose the same economic challenge as China, but nonetheless, enough that we have to address it. If we can just wrap our brains around the fact that we are in a competition, and that the one thing we want to do in that competition is what we did in the Cold War, and that is avoid a third world war, then we can begin to design what we do. We punish what they've done, but we also try to deter what they've done. It was a key component of the Cold War, as the fact that both parties understood the price was so high for a nuclear exchange that neither party pursued it, despite a couple of close calls. It is why I, along with Senator Van Hollen, have put out this idea of laying out ahead of time, specifically, what the penalties would be. What is the price if Putin does this again? And it has to be a high enough price so that he doesn't do it again. And the notion of it is, if you know ahead of time how much it's going to cost you if you do it, you might be less likely to do it. I can't guarantee he won't, but I can guarantee that if he doesn't think the price is high enough, he will. In that realm, do you have any views, either one of you, about the role that deterrence can play in terms of changing the cost-benefit analysis that Vladimir Putin undertakes before he conducts what he did in 2016, again in 2018 or beyond?
I agree with the premise of your question and characterizing this as a big power competition. I think deterrence is absolutely critical. And so when the administration has gone after Deripaska and Vekselberg and Putin's son-in-law, I think that sends a very clear message. When we tighten the sectoral sanctions, I think that sends a strong message. I think we could do more collectively to look at cyber deterrence. I think there's a growing awareness that we've not done enough in that regard. But I think the tools that can be brought to our disposal to increase the message of deterrence, we're supportive of that. There's a lot in the Deter Act that is very positive. It moves in the right direction. There's some aspects of it that we're not comfortable with. I mean, the vesting new mandates almost entirely in a single intelligence official, the DNI, rather than a Senate-confirmed cabinet official, is problematic. As I said earlier, we take the view that national security waivers are very important for diplomacy. Our team is preparing some structured responses to the legislation. We'll be providing in coming days, and look forward to engaging with you more closely on it. But I agree overall with what you've said. Deterrence is critical.
And I know I'm over time. I just want to comment that as far as the Deter Act is concerned, I recognize, at least speaking for myself, I think Senator Van Hollen does as well, that if we want to pass it and turn it into law, there are changes we will need to make because we need the administration to sign it. And we want to do it. Our goal is to pass a bill that deters, not to necessarily have the original product become the law per se, but it needs to be strong enough.